This cozy, beautiful town with many historical buildings is known as Chernivtsi today. But half a century ago, it was referred to as Jerusalem upon Prut.
Jewish life has always been present in Chernivtsi. In the streets and public transportation, one could hear Yiddish. There was no fear. It was normal.
It's the Cities program, and this time we'll show you and tell you the Jewish history of the very famous Bukovinian city.
The Jewish population, from a small ethnic group with no rights, grew into an influential group that dominated many spheres of city life.
You'll see and learn how a contemporary Jewish life in Chernivtsi is different from the Jewish life in other regions of Ukraine.
You cannot say it's a Jewish city, but the Jewry of Ukraine, it is still very prominent here in Chernivtsi when you have like events or you have some conferences or even some places in the night train from Kiev. You very often meet Jewish people who travel for business, for history projects, or just to visit families.
And we're only getting started. As we walk around the central part of Chernivtsi, we can't shake off the feeling that in a matter of seconds we will run into a Yiddish-speaking crowd. The streets are sort of saturated with the Jewish vibe. The city faithfully kept the memory of that distinctive character that filled Chernivtsi only 80 years ago. So what was life really like back at the time? Well, 1 in 6 city residents was Jewish. There were more than 50 synagogues in Chernivtsi before the Second World War. Jews commanded a large part in all spheres of city life. For instance, 45 of 59 Bukovinian lawyers were Jewish. Can you imagine? By the way, a considerable number of all the buildings you're looking at right now were also built by Jews. Let's take this building in the very heart of Chernivtsi, the Jewish Museum located on the first floor.
This building, where the museum was erected in 1908 by using the funds of the Chernivtsi Jewish community as a place where various services, the administration office of our city's Jewish community, were located. You could imagine how big the administration office was if they needed a building of this size, and respectively how big, influential and significant this community was, that this building was erected in the new part of the city in close proximity to the city theater. It wasn't a coincidence. There's a correlation in that.
A century ago, this city became the center of Jewish life, widely known far beyond Eastern Europe. And we can only speculate about how things would look today. The city of Chernivtsi, and together with it everything that belonged to its Jewish population, was a coveted prize for various totalitarian regimes throughout history.
In the fall of 1940, the Soviet regime that was established in Bukovina in June of 1940. During that period, the regime confiscated all personal possessions. In other words, nationalized property of not only private citizens, but organizations as well, including Jewish communities.
But the events mentioned above were only the beginning of everyone's ordeal. On June the 5th, 1941, at the time of the Nazi rule, the city was occupied by the Romanian troops. It was the Romanian authority that turned out to be the most ruthless towards the Bukovinian Jews. And 2 days after the occupation, the first mass exterminations of Jews began. Almost immediately at the bank of the Prut River, about 2,000 Jews were exterminated. Some were machine-gunned. Some were beaten to death, while others were drowned in the river.
It seems that my whole life I've been recovering from those horrors. I still dream of those events. I can't sleep. I can still see it. It's impossible to forget. The cheerless childhood of ours. It burned into our memory.
Clara Katz is one of the few Holocaust survivors in Bukovina. She, at the age of 7, being a mere child, had it very hard, and together with her family went to 2 concentration camps where people were tortured and killed before her eyes. Innocent people as herself, only belonging to a particular ethnic group, the Jews.
I remember a lady who threw bread to us. I remember her vividly. She was wearing a vyshyvanka and a skirt. She was very young and beautiful. She threw bread to us. We came closer to the fence, and that same moment a shot was heard, and she fell on the fence.
In 1991, the Bukovinian Jews, as well as the Jews from Podylia and Odessa region, began their forcible relocation to Transnistria. This was the name of a special zone created in Moldova where people were taken to with one purpose only: to be massacred. All in all, 300,000 Jews, as well as representatives of other ethnicities, found their death there.
Actually, you know this Stolperstein movement, which is very popular in Germany, these are this little bronzy stones which remembers on the old Jewish owners of the houses or inhabitants of the houses. And when you would do it in Chernivtsi, the whole city should be copper or bronzy, so it's you cannot restore a Jewish city with 38% of Jewish inhabitants after the Shoah.
After the mass extermination of Chernivtsi Jews in Transnistria, the majority of survivors refused to live on in Chernivtsi, though before the occupation, this was the desire of many. Clara Katz recalls, the city of Chernivtsi was a genuine example of how representatives of different ethnicities could not only coexist in one territory but truly be friends, show compassion and help each other.
We have an international city, and the street we lived in was also internationally diverse. There were Poles, Germans, we would call them Schwabes then, and when the war began, all Germans left, no one stayed. Poles, Romanians, Germans, Jews, Hungarians, so many of us, and we all coexisted peacefully. A wedding, everybody joined the celebration. God forbid a funeral, then everybody came to pay their last respects. We all lived in harmony. Yiddish could be heard in Kobylянska Street. It was a sort of Nevsky Avenue. Very wealthy people lived there. It wasn't just Yiddish. Other languages could be heard there as well. German, Polish, and Romanian. But Jewish speech could be heard more, since there were so many Jews.
Don't you dare think that, given this tragic history, Jewish life in Chernivtsi is long gone. Not a chance. When our shooting crew came to the city, an annual festival called Meridian Czernowitz was taking place. It has been held for the last 10 years. What does it represent? Well, at different locations all over the city, one can listen to Jewish music or poetry by world-famous Bukovinian Jews, meaning even 80 years later, Jewish culture here lives on.
Chernivtsi is the city where Paul Celan and Rose Auslander lived and worked. Yes, even though their lives came to an end elsewhere, they lived most of their lives in Chernivtsi. Many of their poetical works were done here and are imbued with the spirit of these streets, so you cannot escape from that.
It really is. After all, Jewish life in Chernivtsi before the Second World War was so bright that many outside Bukovina were aware of it.
It is something special, and of course it can never come back. And I don't mean on the literary life, which is famous all over the world. I mean the real Jewish life in Chernivtsi.
And it's very important to remember, Matthias André Richter, together with the team of an international German-Ukrainian project called We Learn to Remember, said these last years have helped to preserve and restore the memory of Jewish life in different Ukrainian towns and cities. The project was initiated by the Dusseldorf Jewish community. And this may sound strange and illogical, but
we don't know actually why, but it was a time after, in the 40s and 50s, where the so-called Bukovinian Jews, they were the dominant factor beside the Polish in the Jewish community of Düsseldorf. And they were like also the refounders of this community.
frankly speaking, the bridges between the cities started to be built during the We Learn to Remember project. Herbert Rubinstein, the former chairman of the Düsseldorf Jewish community, returned to Chernivtsi for the first time in 70 years. He was born in Chernivtsi, and as a child, together with his family, went to the Chernivtsi ghetto during the Holocaust. It was a very challenging thing for Herbert to revisit his hometown, since his last memories of it were very tragic. But it's that visit that initiated the restoration of connections between Chernivtsi and Düsseldorf.
We're doing this remembrance projects not only in Chernivtsi, we also work in other cities, till Kharkiv, till Kremenchuk, and a lot of cities also in other areas of Ukraine. In generally, we have very good connections to the school authorities. Mostly the local authorities are welcome us, and we never had like problems like to get some registration or allowance to do public events or something like that. Yeah. And of course the connection with Chernivtsi is something special, and I think this municipal connection is now real, and it's already kind of institutional. So already social projects, sport projects are planned and really will be realized.
As well as international cultural events, Bukovinian Summer, for example,
with about more than 30 cultural events, and some of them they took part in Düsseldorf, some took part here in Chernivtsi, and we invited artists and writers, scientists from Bukovina or from Chernivtsi to Düsseldorf, and we brought our experts here, so there became an exchange of culture and of people, and of course also of history. That is one of the things which is really remarkable.
Matthias André Richter emphasizes those are not exclusively Jewish projects. They were created to develop friendship between the cities and countries. Nowadays, you can learn more about the Jewish history of Chernivtsi in the local museum, the Museum of Bukovinian Jewish History and Culture. The construction of another museum is almost complete. It's going to be devoted specifically to the Holocaust tragedy in Bukovina. The Jewish community is very active and thriving in Chernivtsi.
As of today, there are very few people in the Chernivtsi Jewish community who appear distinctly Jewish. They look like everyone else. And this is, first of all, a foundation for keeping those outbursts at minimum. And of course, history, culture, and traditions of the city that make a positive impact.
At the same time, nowadays in Chernivtsi, you can run into both adults and children in kippahs. A successful Jewish school is located here, and at Hanukkah in the main square of Chernivtsi, the whole city lights the Hanukkah.
If we talk about Chernivtsi, the level of anti-Semitism here is definitely lower than in the neighboring regions. And the reason is that here Jews have lived for centuries. The Jewish community is and has been an integral part of the city. That's why such outbursts are more moderate here. The Chernivtsi Jewish community of today, if we compare the physical appearance of its representatives, is not at all different from the appearance of their non-Jewish neighbors. Yes, we celebrate Jewish festivals, and we keep our Jewish traditions at home, but otherwise, we are not much different from other people around us.
And all this is proof that Jewish life in Ukraine is present and is returning to its former vibrancy.